Good morning, Shayna. Hey, I thought I would try and just give a simplistic overview of the nuts and bolts of the control mechanism. So, uh, obviously, it's through corporations that they fund everything, how they buy off everybody in every way. The laws are written for the corporations, but it's not just as simple as funding the different political parties through all these political action uh, groups. Let's back up. The Federal Reserve. It was learning about the Federal Reserve is kind of what sort of changed my worldview. Really, uh, uh, the Federal Reserve Act was written by. They put the foxes in charge of the hen houses. What happened? The Federal Reserve Act is written by the bankers, and it's set up completely to favor them. The Federal Reserve is not a federal entity. It's a private company. It's made up of a conglomerate of banks. It's 11 or 12 banks, 11 banks, I think, that make up the Federal Reserve. And they have ultimate control over our money supply, not our treasury, but the Federal Reserve. And all of the money, when they were funding wars in other nations, and when they're doing big bailouts here or whatever, all this money, where it comes from is we're borrowing it from the Federal Reserve, from a bank, from a private bank. So we have to pay interest on that. As a nation, our government borrows the money from this private bank, and we have to pay interest. And now most of the federal taxes that are collected, all your income taxes that everybody reports and pays, and all that, that doesn't go towards uh, running the nation like most people think. That money all goes towards paying the interest on all of our debt to the Federal Reserve. You hear about every year they do this thing where they're doing now, or they argue over the budget and they're going to shut down the government and all this, and they can't pass it, and it's all a fucking show. But they do the same thing with the debt ceiling. This big panic, oh, we're going to hit the debt ceiling, so they just raise it, and they've been doing this forever. Every president just passes the debt on down the row, and they keep raising it. And now, it's really gone crazy these last few years. They've like doubled the amount of money that's in circulation, and 3 minutes. And all and just in the last few years, they've printed more and more and more and more and more money, and it's not even printed in most cases. It's just digitally created. The whole system is. The American dollar used to be gold backed. Our notes, our money said on it that that its value could be redeemed in gold at any Federal Reserve bank, and they've changed that. We've got taken off there's no longer written in our Constitution is how our money should be valued, and that's just been obliterated. There's no gold backing, and it's just all a fiat currency, and it's another subject. So the Federal Reserve was created by the bankers for the bankers, and that's one of the biggest steps towards it. And now there's connections to the big banking families. I'm sure you heard of the Rothschilds. Like, they basically own the World Bank, which almost every is the central bank for just about every nation in the world. The Federal Reserve is our central bank, so each state doesn't have its own money, its own currency, which used to be the case. To unify it as one American currency, we need a central governmental bank, and the Federal Reserve is that. So we gave control of our money supply to this banking cartel, essentially. The Rothschilds are just one family, but they're the prominent one that everybody's heard of. Everybody knows their story, that he had his 5 sons, and they went out and started their little banking dynasty around Europe, and it's grown into the World Bank and blah blah blah. And so they also own some of our. I forget which one is who, but all the big banks, like J.P. Morgan, we know is Chase Bank, and the Rockefellers, I think, are Bank One, and Bank of America is, it doesn't matter. So anyway, the money supply is how they get how they indebted the government to them. And of course, individual politicians are financed and bribed and convinced in other various ways to follow along the guidelines. But anyway, they get the cooperation of the government. So, who decides what the government's supposed to do? We get that message primarily through, there's an organization called the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, this is an extension of the United Nations. So, the UN, and they just consider it a think tank, but it influences a lot of our laws. The recommendations that come from the CFR always get implemented, and that's not just. I looked up a bunch of stuff. I found stuff on the CIA webpage that was all direct from the CFR, and they quoted them and some of the stuff that we get into that later too. So the CFR, if a lot of big politicians and the heads of media, and that's part of the control element, to control the control of information. It's important to have the newspapers and the magazines and then the television stations and whatever sources. Now that it's internet, Google is, again, a whole nother story, the Google thing. So through the money supply and through the advice and counsel of the Council on Foreign Relations, who, when you see a politician speaking to that council, be leery of that politician or that CEO or whoever that is. So that's part of the venue. But yeah, the corporate control of everything. So who owns the corporations? Because the corporations do donate the money that keeps the machine going, that keeps feeding all the animals that are part of the machine, and all that. And so who are the corporations? Well, if you look up any major corporation, anything that's publicly traded, and you look up who the major stockholder is, the biggest shareholder, or the controlling shareholders, there's always three companies that are on there. Of the top five, there's always going to be these three. And it's going to be BlackRock, which isn't even a very old company. It's like the largest asset management company in the world that nobody's ever heard of until just recently. Now I'm hearing their name all the time. BlackRock. So BlackRock, State Street, which I believe is the George Soros connection to that, and then Vanguard. And Vanguard was the BlackRock kind of grew out of Vanguard. The guy that the CEO of that, Larry Fink, he was a Vanguard guy, and well, it doesn't matter. So these three big companies. Now, if you look up Vanguard and look who's the largest shareholder in the Vanguard, it's BlackRock. Look at BlackRock, who's the largest shareholder in BlackRock? Oh, it's Vanguard. I mean, they're the same company, and they own everything. Everything. I mean, you look up, Coca-Cola, NBC. Doesn't matter. Whatever corporation you can think of, they own it. I can guarantee you. Whether it be a utility, whatever. So who are they? Who are these big money people? It's well known that a very tiny percentage of people own the large portion of the wealth. It's very unevenly distributed, right? It's so who's that small percentage? Who are those people? When did that wealth get divided out? Next topic. I'm almost at 10 minutes here. I told you I'd keep them under 10 minutes, so take care. I'll talk to you later, Shana.